Hello again. So in this session, essentially what we'll be talking about primarily are the consumers. So we're going to do some consumer analysis in this chapter, the issues that we need to explore as it pertains to consumer behavior to essentially devise our marketing plan actions. So the key issues that we're going to explore as far as the customers are concerned are who are the current and potential customers, why they buy, what they buy, how do they go about making their purchasing decisions, how do they make their purchasing decisions, where do they buy, and finally where they buy it from, and when do they buy. Okay, so the reason why we are interested in these answers as marketers are is because not all of us are alike. So the underlying concept here is called consumer heterogeneity. Not every single customer or your potential customer is going to have the similar needs or preferences. So as managers, the answers to these questions can really help us come up with very creative strategies to maximize the returns from our investments. So we always have to tie all the efforts that we expend to numbers at the end of the day. So we will explore these questions and the implications thereof for our marketing mix strategies, which are our 4Ps. So who are the customers? That's the key question. As I said before, not all customers are alike. More importantly, we don't all behave in the same way. As a result, understanding these differences in how consumers respond to our marketing mix can really help us make more effective marketing decisions by recognizing these differences and catering the right marketing mix to the right group of customers. Okay, so because consumers are not all alike, there is a need for segmentation. Now, before I jump in on the segmentation bandwagon, we need to understand that in order for any segmentation to be meaningful, consumers in different segments must respond to the marketing stimuli in different ways. Okay, so I will elaborate on this shortly. But if we need to construct segments in this manner, then the challenge becomes identifying consumers that respond to marketing mix stimuli differently across the segments or between segments, and then decided which of these segments to target. Okay, so these are two different issues. That is, identifying the different segments that exist in the consumer population and which segments to target are these two different decisions. And the way we form these segments essentially is the concept is, like I said, consumer heterogeneity. So the segments that we form when we break the market into different segments, the underlying concept that we have to keep in mind is that when you divide the market into the segments, then people or the consumers that you choose to be part of one segment should respond similarly to the marketing mix, but between segments they should respond differently. That's the only way that this entire exercise is going to make sense. Okay. So with respect to segmentation, it's very useful to ask, what is the point of segmentation? Okay. Now, the whole point of segmenting consumers into different bins is to customize our marketing mix and increase our profits. So let us suppose that consumers differ in how sensitive they are to price. Now, some consumers are willing to pay, let's say, $5 per unit, while another group is willing to pay no more than $4. Now, if we did not segment this market, we have the choice of charging either $5 and serving only some of the consumers who are willing to pay that price, or what we can do is charge $4 and we can serve all the consumers. However, if we segment the two groups and selectively send a coupon of $1 to the latter group, we can charge $5 per unit and serve both the segments, which is called price discrimination. So for the same product, you can actually charge $5 to the consumers who are willing to pay $5, and for the other segment of consumers who are willing to pay $4 without decreasing the shelf price, you just choose to send them a coupon of $1, in which again you sort of cater to both the segments. So what we have effectively done by segmenting is customize the price we charge to each segment. Now we are able to reduce price to one group without needlessly subsidizing the other group, because we don't want to leave money on the table, right? So this is a key benefit of segmentation. And in addition to sensitivity to price, consumers may differ in their needs as well. So in how sensitive they are to quality, the channel they purchase from, etc. Now, understanding these differences and then segmenting customers based on these differences will allow us to customize the product, by designing an appropriate product line or distribute products selectively through different channels of distribution. So essentially, this certainly allows us to reduce costs, right, as in our pricing example, and we can also offer the right product to the right segment and allowing us to compete more effectively by customizing our marketing mix. So these are some of the key benefits of segmentation. So that way you don't lose the market, you don't leave any market untapped, but within a more effective strategy, you can actually tap both the markets. Now, of course, we could take the idea of segmentation to the limit in some markets to where they want to design an offering for segments of size 1. So think about a world where every customer is unique, right? So in that case, you could also take it to the next level of segmentation where you treat every individual customer as a segment. So that is called, the whole idea is called mass customization, where you kind of tailor your product based on the needs of a very specific, every single individual customer. Okay, so that's the concept of, that's called mass customization. And we had the idea of mass customization pioneered by Henry Ford in the automobile market. And now with advances in technology, we have the ability to customize the products to match the preferences of individual customers. In fact, a lot of firms are doing that. Nike does that. Levi's does that. So there are a lot of firms that have actually started customizing their products based on the individual needs. And this is fairly prevalent phenomenon now. Okay, like I said, particularly in the apparel industry, where customers have the option of having a pair of jeans customized. In the cosmetic industry, where women can choose the exact shade of lipstick that they want. And even in the hotel industry, where the preferences of the frequent travelers are tracked to customize the rooms and other aspects of the travel experience to suit the individual preferences of the customers. Okay, so it's prevalent in quite a few, like very popular industries. Now, the same is true in many news websites as well. So, for instance, if you go to msn.com, you see general news, and you also have the option of providing your zip code, in which case the local news and weather reports are customized depending upon your location. Okay, so you will see this mass customization is something which is widely used. It's a known concept now. A lot of organizations, a lot of industries have kind of tapped this opportunity where they want to have a relationship with the customers by ensuring them that they are willing to customize their product or their service based on the individual needs. So this is the idea behind mass customization, where the product is tailored to meet the preferences of individual customers. Okay, so a natural question here is, given that there are many differences across consumers, what should segmentation be based on? Should we segment consumers based on their geographic location or demographic characteristics or difference in their lifestyle? So there are several variables. There are several bases of segmentation. Like I said, it could be demographic. You could use demographic variables to segment your market, or you could use geographic variables to segment the market, or you could use psychographic variables or behavioral variables. But as I said before, segmentation is meaningful only if consumers in different segments respond to marketing stimuli differently. So an alternative way of segmentation could be to segment consumers based on observed behavior. Okay, and this, as I mentioned before, maybe a more useful way from the manager's perspective. In fact, of all the variables that I've talked about, if you can collect data on the behavioral variables of your customers, behavioral characteristics of your customers, their usage patterns, where do they primarily shop? Do they shop online, or they believe in shopping in store? So all of this data, you need a lot of data certainly to do this exercise. So if you manage to collect behavioral data, that's actually highly predictive of sales of all the different variables that we've talked about, such as geographic or demographic or psychographic or behavioral. The behavioral segmentation is highly predictive of sales. And here are some behavioral measures that could be used as a basis of segmentation. So I'll give you an example. So you could segment consumers based on how often they buy. That's also a behavioral variable, okay? Resulting in a segment of consumers that purchase frequently and another that purchases infrequently. Now, similarly, we could segment consumers based on how much they buy. So segmenting high volume buyers and low volume buyers. Now, consumers may also differ in their need for service or for quality or performance, and these could also be used as metrics to base segmentation on. Now, some consumers, for instance, may be savvy and very well informed, okay, and may not need much service or hand holding, while others may be ill informed and they may require a fair amount of service. Okay, so but you need to collect all this information. Is that's the only way for you to do the segmentation. Now, you should note that segmentation based on these behavior measures has ready implications for a marketing mix. Because once we recognize that customers differ in their needs for service, we can package the base product with service at a price premium and offer it to the segment that needs service and we just offer the base product with no service to the segment that does not really value service or does not need service. So in this case, we have again customized the product to serve the needs of the two segments in a more efficient way. Now, consumers may also differ on other behavioral dimensions, such as their loyalty that they exhibit in their purchasing decision. So, in the cola market, for example, there might be some consumers who are loyal to Coke or Pepsi, while there may be a third segment that just cares about cola and has no strong preference for either Coke or Pepsi. Now, recognition of the existence of these segments in the market will allow the manager of Coke or Pepsi products to price also in an effective way. So it kind of affects our entire marketing mix, not just the product, but also the price, also the promotion, and where we want to make the product available, the place strategy. Therefore, segmentation has definitely it has implications on your marketing mix. And yet another dimension, we are still in the behavioral measures here. So there's another dimension, which could be attitude or perceptions about your product. There might be some consumers who are positively disposed towards your product and some that may be negatively disposed. So you want to treat them differently, right? So segmenting customers based on attitude or disposition towards your product may allow you to customize your communication strategy, right? So you might hit consumers that are positively disposed with one message and those that are negatively disposed with a different message. So this is an implication on your promotion strategy. Okay, so we have talked about how segmentation has implications on your product strategy, on your price strategy, on your promotion strategy, right? And aside from the benefits I mentioned earlier, segmenting consumers also allows us to analyze the growth potential in each segment, which in turn allows us to decide whether they are worth targeting or not. Because like I mentioned, segmentation and targeting are two separate concepts. Segmentation essentially means dividing the market based on, you have some basis of your segmentation. So you divide the market in different groups where people within a group should respond similarly to your marketing mix, and between groups should respond differently, right? So once we decide on which segments to target, now based on some evaluative criteria, let's say we have some evaluative criteria. So, and once we decide on which segments to target, we can then analyze the competition we face in serving each of the segments and what the competition offers so that we can customize our product, the price, the communication, and distribution decisions to compete for the targeted segments in the most efficient manner. And we said earlier that we could segment consumers based on volume. Now, this is something we see a lot. So a lot of stores are doing it now through their loyalty programs where discounts are tied to the volume purchased. So they're using this information. Now, this is also common in the airline and the hotel industry, where frequent flyer programs or reward points are tied to the volume of consumption. So note that all of this analyzes the analysis of the competition, what they offer, and customizing the marketing mix can occur only once we have done the segmentation. Now, there are other popular ways of segmenting consumers. The text has a fairly detailed discussion of these approaches, so I will keep this discussion brief. You should look at cohort analysis, which is an age-based segmentation approach, psychographic based on segmentation, based on attitudes, value product, and media usage. So there is segmentation based on differences in values, lifestyles, attitudes, and other segmentation schemes discussed in the text. Again, I just want to tell you that you can technically segment consumers based on anything: age, income, gender, occupation, which are your demographic variables, or psychographic variables such as lifestyle, attitudes, values. But for a manager, unless the resulting segments respond to marketing mix differently, like between segments, such a segmentation is not useful. Now, said differently, if the answer to would I charge the resulting segments different prices, or would I promote to these segments differently, or would I offer different products to these segments is no, then such a segmentation certainly does not make sense, because it does not allow the manager to customize his or her marketing mix and is therefore of no use. If all consumers are going to behave in a similar manner to your marketing mix, what is the idea of breaking the market in segments and then coming up with different pricing strategies, different promotion strategies? Because you'll be expending a lot of efforts coming up with different marketing mix. But if all consumers are going to behave similarly to your marketing mix, then this entire exercise is pointless. Okay. So this is not to say that segmentation based on these approaches cannot be useful. Well, a lot of high-end wine manufacturers have benefited from segmenting consumers based on values and lifestyles, because they uncovered that on average, gay couples tend to have higher disposable income relative to straight couples, and therefore are a group worth targeting with their high-end wines. So really, what these wine manufacturers want to do is target households with high disposable income, which happens to be correlated with lifestyle. And so segmentation based on lifestyle in this case completely makes sense. Now, typically, segmentation will involve some data collection exercise. Like I mentioned earlier, as we discussed in the marketing research lecture, the data that you may need to be collected, either primary data or may already exist, which is your secondary data. And in this day and age, with all the technology and tracking of consumer behavior that is occurring, a lot of secondary data already exists. So if I am a store that's wanting to segment consumers based on volume of purchase, I just need to look at the scanner transaction data, which tracks every single visit made by every household. And then I can use the volume of purchase made by the household to segment them into high or low volume segments. And this might be one way to use the existing data to segment customers. Now, you can then target these segments with different price or promotion offers. Now, in some cases, we may not have the data we need, in which case we either conduct a survey or gather information to base our segmentation on. So when we are gathering information, it's very useful to gather information from consumers who do not purchase our product, which can be useful in understanding why these consumers do not purchase. That's also information. So in understanding why these customers, why they don't purchase our product and give us the necessary information, maybe to change our product or other marketing mix, if we choose to target this group down the line. So now, as I said before, identifying the different consumer segments that exist and deciding whether or not to target them while related are slightly different issues. Now, in identifying the segments, the challenge is to identify the characteristics which distinguish one segment from the other. As we said, segments could differ in how sensitive they are to price, how sensitive they are to quality, to performance, channels they purchase from, etc. So that's one. And the second question is, given these differences in the characteristics of different consumer segments, is each segment worth targeting? Now, as a manager, the answer to which segments to target will depend on the trade-offs that he or she may face in serving some or all the segments. Sometimes the cost of reaching out to certain segments is really high. In that case, it may not be the best or the optimal strategy to target that segment. In other case, it could be the accessibility could be an issue. Sometimes it's very hard to be accessible to a certain type of target market. Okay, so in that case, all the efforts that you expend, energies, so you have to understand there has to be some evaluative criteria, which essentially is going to help you choose the right segments to target. So going back to our example of high and low value customer segments, if the high value segment is willing to pay $10 and the low value segment is willing to pay $8, we could simply target the high value segment and charge $10, or we could charge both segments by charging $8. This is, of course, assuming that you charge the same price to both the segments. That is, we are ruling out couponing or other price discrimination strategies. So, what is more profitable? What is more profitable will depend on the size of these two segments, which is also which could also be one of the evaluative criteria. Maybe the size of the market also helps you identify which segments to target. So, if the high value segment is relatively large, then ignoring or not targeting the low value segment may be more profitable. But if both segments are sufficiently large, then targeting both would actually make more sense. Now, in that case, the manager should be thinking about targeting the two segments with a product line if the preferences across the two segments are sufficiently different. So these are inherent trade-offs which need to be examined before making the targeting decisions. I'll give you an example of Gap. So Gap has, if you look at the different lines that they carry, so all these particular retailers are actually owned by Gap. All these brands actually belong to the parent organization Gap. So Old Navy is one of them, Gap itself, Banana Republic, and then there are two more. Okay, so based on, because they understand that the markets, so they have broken down the market into different segments based on their preferences for the product, the quality of the product, or for the pricing, the willingness to pay for your product. So essentially, so they have these different lines. So they have different brands that are part of the same parent organization, but they serve the needs of very different markets that are highly differentiated. So that's something you could do. So in this case, they are tapping all the segments in the apparel industry, but with very different products and with different pricing strategy and with different communication strategy. Okay, so like I said, there may be some inherent trade-offs which need to be examined before making the targeting decisions. Now, when making the targeting decision, the question of whether we are targeting too many or too few segments also needs to be addressed. So we talked about mass customization earlier. The answer to whether or not we are targeting too many segments may also depend on the category. For example, if we think of automobile market customers, let's say their preferences for their ideal shape, performance, reliability may be very heterogeneous. When I say heterogeneous, they're very dissimilar, right? So let's say their preferences are very dissimilar in terms of their ideal shape, performance, reliability. So mass customizing automobiles to the individual tastes may actually be prohibitively expensive, right? On the other hand, if we think of gym memberships, so once the fixed costs are incurred, if some customers want membership only for swimming pool, let's say they just want to use the pool there, and with others want only the exercise equipment or only tennis service, it can be easily done because the customization does not impose any additional costs because you've already incurred the fixed costs here. So the point that I'm trying to make is in some categories, it may be better to ignore some segments because it may be too expensive to target or to serve their needs. So in developing target markets, we might want to establish a link between customers' behavior and targetable characteristics. So imagine you are a catalog operation. Now, based on your past catalog mailings, you find that some customers purchase a lot, they buy often, while some customers are not responsive to your catalog mailings at all. Okay, so if we can relate this exhibited behavior, that is the volume and the frequency of purchase, to demographic characteristics of consumers. For example, you can use the demographic characteristics of other consumers to make predictions about how they are likely to behave. Now, in other words, you can make predictions about likely behavior of new consumers that you have not transacted with using just their demographic characteristics. So, for instance, in the cell phone market, you might find that heavy users of cell phone make more than $50,000 a year. And using this information, we can actually take a new consumer, and depending on whether their income is above or below 50K a year, we can forecast whether they're likely to be a heavy user or a light user. So this is also a benefit from linking behavior to targetable characteristics. Now, the other issues related to targeting are segment size, growth rate, accessibility, competitive position. Now, all these issues should be factored in when deciding whether or not to target a specific segment. For example, a segment may be very large but it may not be still profitable to serve if the competition is too intense. In that case, if your barriers to entry are too high, right? Or if the customer has already established a strong position in that particular category, so even if the segment size is large, it may still not be a profitable segment. Or unless we position our product, it all depends on how we want to position our product, because our position relative to competition may be weak, given the other player may be very well established for that market. So to address these issues, for instance, to assess our competitive position, we can begin by asking, why do consumers buy? So our value proposition vis-a-vis our competition will depend on the answers to these questions. And depending on the benefits and the needs that different segments that we decide to serve, we can also tailor our advertising or communication strategy appropriately. Now, the other thing that is also important is how consumers go about making their purchase decisions, right? There's a lot of psychology that is involved here as well. So how do they search for alternatives? What sources of information they use to search? Because this will in general depend on the level of involvement that customers have. So for instance, when customers are purchasing a can of tuna or a ketchup, chances are they are relying on their past experience in making their purchase decisions, right? You don't actually go and call a friend or talk to a family member when you're making a decision of buying a ketchup, right? So this is mostly depends on your past, the memory. So it all depends on, this is all ingrained in your past memory, in your memory essentially, about your past experiences that you've had. So you actually will make a decision by not relying too much on these external sources of information, right? So they are relying mostly on their past experience or their memory in making their purchase decision. Or the choice set is also ingrained that it may be an automatic decision. Sometimes we just go and let's say Heinz and Hunt's are two key players when it comes to ketchup industry. So you may already have some loyalty for one brand, but if let's say if the retailer is out of Hunt's ketchup, then you automatically may shift to Heinz ketchup without putting in too much effort. Now think about it. If on the other hand, if I am in the market for a very expensive product like a car or a washing machine or some kind of a durable good, which I do not purchase often, then I might conduct a more thorough search before making a decision. So essentially, there is a search for alternatives and then a product or a brand choice. And it's really important to recognize the nature of search that consumers might engage in a particular product category that you are operating. Okay, so the set of alternatives that customers may have that actually can fall in one of the several categories, the set of alternatives form your consideration set essentially. Okay, so after going through the search process, the consumers may narrow down the set of alternatives to one where each brand in the set has some positive probability of being chosen. This is called your consideration set. The inert set is the set of products where customers are unaware of, and hence there is no chance that any product in this set will be purchased. Now, being in the inert set does not necessarily mean that the product is bad. The customer is not aware of it. Now, if it could just be that the firm has not made a reasonable effort to advertise and make people aware of the product's existence. Now, the purchase set, on the other hand, is a set of products that the customer or the consumer has actually purchased in a specified time horizon. And as a marketing manager, it's really important to determine what your product status is in the mind of the customer. So we want to ensure that our product is not only in the consumer's consideration set, but should also be in the purchase set. If you're in a inert set, then certainly you have to make your consumers aware of the product. And if you're in the evoked set, that means that from the consideration set that your particular brand was removed. So every attempt should be made to make sure that we are not in the consumer's inert set. Now, what consumers end up purchasing from the consideration set depends on the value that they associate from each product. So if the consumer is rational, the product that they choose must offer them the highest value. So it's thereof important to understand how consumers map the attributes that the product has to the value that they derive from the product. Now, recall that the consumers purchase the product for the benefits, right, that it offers, not just for the attributes that it possesses. Because we have to always, because at the end of the day, we are trying to satisfy some underlying need of a customer. So it has to offer some benefit, some value to the product, to the customer, and not just the attributes. Of course, they are linked. I'm not discounting that. But at the end of the day, we have to think about what are the key benefits that our product is offering. Now, think about, so if you think of the value that the customer derives as some weighted function of the attributes of the product, then through techniques like conjoint analysis, it's possible to determine the weights that consumers place on different attributes to get a general sense of the overall value that the product offers. Now, the conjoint analysis presumes that the value that the customer derives is a linear combination of the attributes that the alternative is perceived to possess with weighs on each attribute that is sort of estimated. Now, once we obtain these estimates, we can then compare the value that different alternatives offer given their attribute levels and predict what the consumer is likely to choose. So we do conjoint analysis to kind of predict whether the customer is going to purchase the product or not. Okay. Now remember that in the search for alternatives, consumers use several sources of information, and many a times they rely on their own past experience, which is why it's important to analyze consumers' consumption experience with your product as well. So if my earlier experiences with the product were poor, then I'm not very likely to include the product in my consideration set going forward, or even if I did not, I am not very likely to purchase it, right? So the experience that the consumers have with your product often depend on their past on experiences, on their expectations. Does the experience conform to expectations, right? So the expectations are clearly formed prior to the consumption, which may come from word of mouth, past experiences, etc. Now, if the experiences are favorable, that is more likely to lead to repeat purchases, clearly, because if there is a gap between the consumer's experience and the expectation, then the consumer is not going to be satisfied, right? So if the experiences are favorable, that is if there is no gap between the expectation and the experience, then clearly the customer is going to be more satisfied, and certainly it may lead to repeat purchases. So it's important for the managers to set the right expectations and deliver on an experience that exceeds consumers' expectations. So if the manager hypes the product too much, let's say if you oversell your product, in which case you may inflate the expectations, then the consumer will most likely be unsatisfied. Now, if on the other hand, the product is not pitched appropriately, it might not even enter the consumer's consideration set, right? So the manager has to walk a fine line to make sure that the right expectations are set. And actually, this is quite tedious, which comes with a lot of surveys. You have to, again, gather a lot of information, and you have to be genuine as a brand. So particularly now that we have so much social media marketing, a lot of brands, they're expending so much effort in coming up with the right social media campaigns to build trust. So to tell their customers that they are genuine. And when you want to position yourself as a genuine brand, you must always make sure that you don't inflate the expectations or don't undersell yourself, right? So you have to walk a fine line, essentially, to make sure that the expectations are set that are correct. Okay, so our segmentation exercise may have revealed that customer segments differ in the channels from which they purchase. Now, this results from the answer to the first question: where are customers buying? Where are these consumers buying your products from? So once we learn the different channels, we can analyze the emerging trends. By analyzing the emerging trends, we can actually find out, we can learn a lot about different channels, such as some channels of distribution may be growing while others may be shrinking. So by analyzing the emerging trends, we can again, get some clear answers. So it's important to recognize that these trends, are something which have to be factored in when we are making these decisions, so that we can ensure that our products are available in the channels that are sought out by the segments that we have chosen to target, because availability is a necessary condition for purchase. If your product is not available, the right channel. It may be the best product out there. It may be part of the consideration set also. It may be the right, you may have even picked up the right pricing strategy based on the consumer willingness to pay. And let's say you're targeting the right segment, but at the end of the day, making your product available at the right time, at the right place is a necessary condition for purchase. So which channels you decide to distribute on will also have implications for your other marketing mix. Because, for example, the competition you face on each channel may also be different. Okay. So the other dimensions of consumer behavior that are relevant in purchase timing, when do consumers buy? That's also important. What time of the day do they purchase from? What day of the week, the month, etc. So several years ago, one of the supermarkets in the Northeast decided to experiment by charging different prices by time of the day. Now, a person working full-time will probably shop before or after office hours. And because of the time constraint, they may, that they may have, they may also be less price sensitive also. Okay. On the other hand, retired people or elderly folks who are more likely, to be, they're apparently more, they're less time constrained and they may be more likely to be price sensitive. They don't face the same constraints because they have time in hand, right? And they could stop and shop in the middle of the day. So we could go with this belief, if it makes sense for the store to charge lower prices during the middle of the day and increase prices the rest of the day. So that's a meaningful insight, right? And by understanding how consumers purchase, when they purchase, we can actually do some price discrimination just based on that information. Like I said, so the time constrained consumers will come to your store before office hours or after office hours, whereas maybe at home, the homemakers or the retired people who have more time in hand, maybe less time constrained, therefore maybe more price sensitive. So therefore you could actually price your product differently based on the time of the day. Now, while this makes sense from the store's perspectives, there are certainly some ethical issues that we have to take into consideration. And there could be a possible backlash by consumers, which can hurt the store's image, because price discrimination is not classified as something unethical, because most of the businesses do price discrimination based on the willingness that the customer has to pay for your product. But indeed, after experimenting with this pricing policy, the store abandoned it because it didn't work very well. This particular example that I was giving, it didn't sort of work very well because when consumers found out about the price discrimination based on the time constraints, it made them unhappy. So there was a backlash. So, but the point of analyzing consumers' purchase timing is to come up with mechanisms that can increase store profitability by customizing the marketing mix. And understanding of purchase time can also help stores manage demand and supply variations in a very effective manner. So to conclude, what we have done is explored consumer behavior and the pertinent questions that need to be examined and addressed to derive implications for our marketing strategy, in particular, the 4 Ps. With that, I'll wrap up this session. Thank you very much.